What if the person who promised to love and protect you forever was the same person who tried to send you to your grave? For Elara Vance, this nightmare became a reality. She had the perfect husband, the perfect home, a life painted in shades of gold. But beneath the polished surface, a dark secret was festering, fueled by greed and betrayal. Pushed from a cliff and left for dead by her husband, Julian, her story was supposed to end there. But it didn't. This isn't just a story of survival. It's the story of a woman who walked through hell and returned not as a victim, but as the architect of a spectacular reckoning. Elara Vance believed her life was a testament to modern fairy tales. She lived with her husband, Julian Vance, in a sprawling penthouse overlooking the shimmering lights of Boston. Their apartment, featured once in an Architecture Digest, was a symphony of glass, steel, and minimalist art, a space that felt both expansive and intimate. To their friends and family, they were the golden couple. Julian was a charismatic and ambitious financial analyst on the fast track to a partnership at a prestigious firm, Archer and Sterling. Elara, with her background in art history, worked as a freelance curator for private collectors, a job she loved for its quiet beauty and intellectual challenge. Their love story had begun like a screenplay. They met at a charity gala. He'd been instantly captivated by her quiet intelligence and the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about Renaissance art. He pursued her with a charming intensity that swept her off her feet. He remembered the smallest details, her favorite flower peonies, her preference for Earl Grey tea, the obscure Italian painter she'd written her thesis on. He made her feel seen, cherished, and safe. "You're my anchor, Elara," he would often whisper, tracing the line of her jaw as they lay in bed, the city lights twinkling below. "Everything I do for us, to build our future." And Elara believed him. She poured her heart into their marriage, creating a sanctuary for him to return to after his high-stakes days at the office. She managed their home, hosted flawless dinner parties for his colleagues, and was his most ardent supporter. When he spoke of market volatility and risky investments, she'd listen patiently, her faith in his brilliance unwavering. But in the 4th year of their marriage, subtle cracks began to appear in the perfect facade, so small at first that Elara dismissed them as products of her own anxiety. Julian started working later, his nights filled with emergency client meetings and market analyses that stretched into the early hours of the morning. When he came home, he smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, a sharp, expensive scent like jasmine and sandalwood. When she asked, he'd laugh it off. "Oh, that's probably Isabel from legal. Her office is next to the conference room. The woman bathes in that stuff." Isabel Croft. The name had been mentioned a few times. A sharp, fiercely ambitious corporate lawyer who had recently joined Julian's firm. Elara had met her once at a company function. Isabel was everything Elara was not: tall, impossibly chic, with a razor-sharp bob and a predatory smile. She had looked at Elara with a dismissive glance, her eyes lingering on Julian for a moment too long. Elara had felt a pang of insecurity, but had quickly chastised herself for being jealous. The financial strain also began to show, though Julian went to great lengths to hide it. A credit card was declined at a restaurant. A casual mention of a vacation to Tuscany was met with a vague, "Maybe next year, darling." The market's a bit unpredictable right now. Elara, who had her own comfortable income and a modest inheritance from her grandmother, offered to help. "Don't be ridiculous, Elle," he'd said, his tone sharper than intended. "I'm the man of this house. I provide. I have everything under control. But he didn't. What Alara didn't know was that Julian's ambition had curdled into reckless greed. He had made a series of high-risk off-the-books trades using borrowed capital, promising his private investors astronomical returns. When the market turned against him, he wasn't just facing losses. He was facing ruin and potential prison time. He was millions of dollars in debt to people who were not known for their patience. His desperation became a fertile ground for Isabel Croft's influence. She saw the weakness behind his charm, the panic behind his confident facade. She wasn't just an affair. She was a co-conspirator. One evening, Alara was working late in her home office, cataloguing a new collection for a client, when Julian entered. He was holding 2 glasses of wine and wearing the tender smile that always made her heart melt. "I'm sorry, I've been so distant lately," he said, his voice a low, soothing hum. "Work has been a nightmare. I've been a terrible husband." "No, you haven't," Alara replied, accepting the glass. "We all go through stressful times. I've booked us a weekend away," he continued, his eyes gleaming. "Just the 2 of us. We're going hiking up near the Berkshires. Remember that trail we loved, Raven's Peak, fresh air, no cell service, just you and me. A reset." Alara's face lit up. It felt like a return to the early days of their relationship, to the man she had fallen in love with. "Oh, Julian, that's wonderful. I'd love that." He pulled her into an embrace, his arms wrapping tightly around her. "I just want things to be perfect again," he whispered into her hair. As she hugged him back, she couldn't see the cold, calculating expression on his face. He wasn't just planning a weekend getaway. 2 days earlier, Julian had met with their insurance agent, and without Alara's knowledge, had taken out a new life insurance policy on her, a policy worth $5 million with him as the sole beneficiary. The first premium payment had cleared that morning. His plan was anything but a reset. It was a final, brutal solution. The decision to murder his wife was not a single lightning strike moment for Julian Vance. It was a slow, creeping poison that had seeped into his thoughts over weeks, cultivated in the hushed late-night conversations he had with Isabel Croft. Their affair had moved beyond the physical. It had become a strategic alliance fueled by mutual greed. Their meeting spot was a sterile, impersonal hotel bar downtown, the kind of place where anonymity was the main attraction. Isabel sat across from him, her long, lacquered nails tapping impatiently on her cocktail glass. "They called again, Julian," she said, her voice low and sharp. "Mr. Petrov's associates. They aren't asking for their $3 million anymore. They're demanding it. And they mention they know where we live. Both of us." A cold sweat prickled Julian's neck. He had borrowed money from a notoriously ruthless underground lender to cover his initial trading losses, a catastrophic mistake that now hung over him like a guillotine. "I can fix it," he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "I just need more time. One more big trade." Isabel let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Stop deluding yourself. Your trading days are over. Your credit is shot, your reputation at the firm is hanging by a thread, and you owe money to men who solve problems with body bags. There is no one more trade." She leaned forward, her eyes like chips of ice. "But there is another way, a permanent solution." She had first floated the idea a week prior, speaking in hypotheticals testing his moral elasticity. She spoke of insurance policies, of tragic accidents, of fresh starts. At first, Julian had been horrified, recoiling from the sheer callousness of it. This was Alara, his wife. The woman who laid out his suit every morning, who believed in him when no one else did. But Isabel was persistent, a serpent whispering in his ear. She painted a vivid picture of their future, a life of unimaginable wealth and freedom, far away from Boston and their debts. They could move to Monaco or Zurich or anywhere they wanted. Think about it, Julian. She'd purred her hand, covering his on the table. $5 million, tax-free. It's not just about paying off Petrov. It's about the life we deserve. No more pretending. No more hiding. Just us. She skillfully dismantled his affection for Ilara, recasting it as a burden. She's holding you back. She's sweet, yes, but she's simple. She doesn't understand the world we operate in. She doesn't understand the pressure you're under. She would never understand what needs to be done. His guilt was a flimsy barrier against his terror and his greed. The fear of what Petrov's men would do to him was a tangible physical thing. He imagined broken bones, a shallow grave. Juxtaposed with that was Isabel's intoxicating vision, a sun-drenched villa, the clinking of champagne glasses, the end of all his fear. Slowly, disgustingly, the scales began to tip. He started to see Ilara not as his wife, but as the key to his survival and his prosperity. The planning began in earnest. It had to look like an accident. A car crash was too messy, too many variables. A home invasion, too risky. It was Isabel who suggested Raven's Peak. "You told me you took her there once," she said, scrolling through pictures of the trail on her tablet. "It's beautiful, but notoriously treacherous. The ridge trail is narrow with a sheer drop. People have accidents there all the time. A slip, a tragic fall. Who would question it? The grieving husband." The plan was chillingly simple. They would hike to the scenic overlook. He would suggest taking a photo of her near the edge. A moment of distraction, a sudden firm push. There would be no witnesses. The remote location meant it would take hours for any rescue team to even be dispatched. Survival from a fall like that was impossible. Julian immersed himself in the morbid details. He researched response times for emergency services in that county. He read articles about grieving spouses studying the right words to say the correct emotions to display. He rehearsed the frantic 911 call in his head. "My wife," she slipped. "Oh God." She fell. "Please, you have to help her." The night before they were scheduled to leave, Ilara packed their bags, humming a cheerful tune. She'd laid out their hiking gear, her bright blue windbreaker next to his dark grey one. "I'm so excited," she said, turning to him with a radiant smile. "It feels like we haven't done this in forever. I feel like we're finally getting back to us." For a fleeting moment, a wave of profound shame washed over him. She was so good, so pure. The trust in her eyes was a dagger to his conscience. He almost broke. He almost confessed everything: the debt, the affair, the monstrous plan. He could have thrown himself at her mercy, begged for her forgiveness. But then his phone buzzed. A text from Isabel. "Tomorrow, everything changes. Don't lose your nerve. I'll be waiting." The image of Isabel, powerful, ambitious, and ruthless, eclipsed the image of his loving wife. The vision of their shared future, built on a foundation of blood and money, became more real to him than the quiet, gentle life he was about to destroy. He pushed the guilt down, burying it deep under a layer of cold resolve. He smiled back at Ilara, a perfect imitation of the loving husband she believed him to be. "Me too, darling," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "It's going to be a day to remember." The drive to the Berkshires was cloaked in a deceptive tranquility. The late autumn sun cast a golden glow on the fiery foliage, and Alara, filled with optimistic hope for their reset, chattered happily about their plans for the upcoming holidays. Julian played his part perfectly, nodding, smiling, and placing a hand on her knee, his touch a vile betrayal. Inside his heart, hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety and anticipation. Every mile they drove closer to Raven's Peak was a mile further away from the man he once was. They arrived at the trailhead under a clear, crisp blue sky. The air was cool and smelled of pine and damp earth. "It's even more beautiful than I remember," Alara said, breathing in deeply. She was vibrant, her cheeks flushed with excitement, completely oblivious to the abyss she was about to face. The hike began innocently enough. They navigated the familiar path, their boots crunching on fallen leaves. They spoke of trivial things, a movie they'd seen, a funny story about their neighbor's dog. For a few moments, walking beside her, Julian felt a surreal sense of normalcy, as if this were just another weekend, another memory they were creating together. But the weight of the $5 million insurance policy and the debt he owed felt like a physical stone in his gut. After about an hour, they reached the turnoff for the ridge trail leading to the overlook. A wooden sign warned "Caution, narrow trail, steep drop-offs. Proceed with care. Ready for the best view in the state." Julian asked, his voice strained. Always Alara beamed her trust absolute. The trail narrowed significantly, with the mountain rising on one side and a sheer cliff face dropping hundreds of feet on the other. A sea of green and gold treetops stretched out below a beautiful, terrifying void. Alara walked ahead, her steps confident. Julian followed a few feet behind his own steps, feeling heavy, leaden. His mouth was dry. His palms were slick with sweat. This was it. The moment was approaching. They reached the overlook, a small rocky platform that jutted out from the cliff. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic vista of the rolling hills and distant mountains. "Oh, Julian, it's incredible," Alara whispered, standing near the center of the platform, her back to him, as she gazed out at the horizon. "It is he," managed to say his voice, a hoarse whisper. "Now, do it now," Isabel's voice echoed in his mind. "Don't lose your nerve. Come stand over here," he said, his voice regaining some of its manufactured charm. "Let me get a picture of you with that view. Right by the edge, it'll look amazing." Alara, ever obliging, smiled and moved cautiously towards the precipice. "Like this. Don't make me stand too close. You know how I feel about heights." She laughed, a light, airy sound that was brutally poignant. "Just a little closer," he urged, raising his phone as if to frame a shot. "Perfect." She stood there, her back to him, a fragile silhouette against the vast, empty sky. Her blue windbreaker was a slash of vibrant color against the earthy tones of the rock and trees. In that split second, Julian saw their entire life together flash before his eyes, their wedding day, her laughter filling their apartment, the way she slept with one hand tucked under her cheek. A tremor of hesitation, the last gasp of his conscience, shook him. But then he thought of Petrov. He thought of prison. He thought of the life of luxury Isabel had promised. And he made his choice. He closed the distance between them in 2 quick, silent steps. Alara, sensing his movement, started to turn a questioning look on her face. "Julian." Her name died on her lips as his hands slammed into the center of her back. It wasn't a shove. It was a powerful, decisive push executed with the cold efficiency of a business transaction. Her eyes widened in a moment of pure, unadulterated shock and betrayal. There was no time to scream. The force of the impact lifted her off her feet, her body tipping forward into the void. For Alara, the world dissolved into a sickening, terrifying lurch. The solid ground vanished from beneath her feet. The sky and the earth swapped places in a dizzying, violent blur. The last thing she saw was Julian's face, not twisted in anger or rage, but blank, impassive like a stranger. It was the face of a man closing a deal. Her body cartwheeled through the air. The wind rushed past her ears, a deafening roar that drowned out her own thoughts. Then came the impact. Not one, but a series of brutal, jarring collisions as her body crashed through a canopy of thick pine branches. The snapping of wood mingled with the sickening crack of her own bones. The branches, while breaking her fall and likely saving her life, ripped and tore at her, inflicting terrible damage. Her final coherent thought was a single agonizing question. Why then everything went black? Up on the ridge, Julian stood, panting, his phone still clutched in his hand. He stared at the empty space where his wife had just been. Silence. He waited for a scream, a thud, anything. But there was only the sound of the wind whispering through the trees. He waited a full minute, his meticulously rehearsed plan taking over. He forced his face into a mask of horror. He fumbled with his phone, his fingers shaking, and dialed 911. "My wife!" he screamed into the phone, the fake panic sounding convincingly real. She fell. We were hiking on Raven's Peak. She was taking a picture, and she slipped. Oh God, she's gone. Please, you have to send help. He had done it. It was over. As he gave the dispatcher their location, a slow, cold smile crept across his face. He was free. He was rich. He was a grieving widower, and no one would ever know the truth. Far below the ridge of Raven's Peak, in a dense, inaccessible part of the forest, Alara Vance lay broken but alive. The thick boughs of the old-growth pines had acted as a brutal life-saving net, slowing her descent before she landed on a steep, moss-covered embankment. She was unconscious, bleeding and shattered, but her heart, against all odds, was still beating. She was found 2 days later, not by the official search and rescue team, who had focused their efforts on the base of the main cliff, but by a reclusive man named Silas. Silas was a former park ranger who had retreated from the world decades ago after a personal tragedy, living a quiet, off-the-grid existence in a small cabin miles from any marked trail. He was checking his hunting snares when his dog, a grizzled old hound named Buster, began barking frantically, leading him to the crumpled form in the bright blue windbreaker. Silas, with his years of wilderness experience, knew she was in a critical state. He carefully splintered her leg with branches, and cloth cleaned her wounds as best he could, and with Herculean effort managed to transport her on a makeshift travois back to his cabin. He nursed her with a quiet, stoic competence, using herbal remedies and old-world knowledge. For a week, Alara drifted in and out of a feverish delirium, her mind a maelstrom of pain and fragmented memories of a blue sky. A sudden push and Julian's cold, empty eyes. When she finally regained full consciousness, the physical pain was eclipsed by the emotional agony of memory. It hadn't been an accident. He had pushed her. The man she loved, the man she had built her life with, had tried to murder her. The realization was a soul-crushing weight, far heavier than any of her physical injuries. Grief raw and savage consumed her. She wept for days, not for her broken body, but for her shattered heart and the death of the life she thought she had. Silas, a man of few words, simply sat with her, offering her broth and quiet solidarity. He never pushed her to talk, but one evening as she stared into the crackling fire, she told him everything. He listened without judgment, his weathered face a mask of grim understanding. "The world can be a dark place," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Some men are hollow. They fill that hollowness with greed." He then gave her a piece of advice that would become her mantra. "Grief is a storm. You can let it drown you, or you can learn to sail." Meanwhile, the world believed Elara Vance was dead. The search had been called off after a week. Her tattered, bloodied windbreaker was found snagged on a rock at the bottom of the gorge, and the authorities concluded she had been taken by wildlife after the fall. Julian played the part of the devastated husband to perfection. He gave a tearful press conference, established a charitable foundation in her name, and was comforted by friends and family who saw only his profound grief. The $5 million insurance payment was processed and paid out. In Silas's remote cabin, cut off from the world, Elara began the slow, arduous process of healing. Her body mended the bones, knitting back together, leaving scars that would forever tell the story of her fall. But it was her spirit that underwent the most profound transformation. The storm of grief subsided, and in its place a cold, hard resolve began to form. She would not be a victim. She would not let him win. The memory of his betrayal became the fuel for a fire she never knew she possessed. She knew she couldn't just reappear. Julian was now a rich man, insulated by public sympathy. Who would believe her fantastical story against the word of the grieving widower? They would think she was crazy, an imposter. She needed to disappear completely, to let Elara Vance remain dead. She had one person in the world she could trust, her childhood best friend, Chloe. Chloe was a fiercely loyal, tech-savvy graphic designer living in Chicago. Using Silas's satellite phone, his one concession to the modern world, Elara made a call that would change everything. Chloe's gasp of disbelief on hearing Elara's voice quickly turned to furious outrage as Elara recounted the story. Without a moment's hesitation, Chloe agreed to help. She was a genius with digital trails and identities. Within a week, she had a plan. She flew to a town near the Berkshires, and under the cover of darkness drove Elara away from Silas's cabin. They shared a tearful, emotional reunion and a somber goodbye with the quiet man who had saved her life. "You'll come back one day?" Silas asked. "Only when it's done," Elara promised. Chloe smuggled Elara back to Chicago. She used her skills to create a new identity for her. Birth certificate, social security number, driver's license, a complete digital and physical ghost. Elara Vance was dead. In her place, Eva Stone was born. Eva for a new beginning. Stone for the unbreakable will that now defined her. Chloe also helped her access the funds from her grandmother's inheritance, which Julian had never known about, providing her with the seed money for her new life. Elara now, Eva, was unrecognizable. The fall and her recovery had left her leaner, harder. She cut her long, soft brown hair into a sharp, angular bob and dyed it jet black. She traded her flowing artistic wardrobe for tailored, severe suits. Her eyes, once warm and full of trust, now held a glint of cold steel. The soft-spoken art curator was gone, replaced by a woman forged in betrayal and pain. She spent the next year not just healing, but learning. She devoured books on finance, corporate law, and investment strategy, the world Julian had inhabited. She would not just face him again. She would meet him on his own battlefield and destroy him. Her target was set New York City, the heart of the financial world, where men like Julian were made and broken. New York City was a chaotic, beautiful jungle, and Eva Stone moved through it with the focused precision of a predator. She rented a modest apartment and enrolled in intensive finance and market analysis courses, her mind a sponge, absorbing information with a ferocity that startled her professors. She wasn't just learning, she was arming herself. The world of derivatives, leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers became her new language. Every complex algorithm she mastered, every market trend she successfully predicted, was another stone laid in the foundation of her future revenge. Her breakthrough came not in a classroom, but at a low-key investment seminar. She found herself in a debate during a Kuanda session, challenging the keynote speaker on his analysis of a struggling biotech firm. She spoke with a calm, data-driven authority that turned heads. She argued that the firm wasn't failing. Its most valuable asset, a patent for a revolutionary drug delivery system, was being criminally undervalued by a market focused on short-term losses. After the session, a man approached her. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with silvering temples and eyes that held a sharp, discerning intelligence. He introduced himself as Damien Blackwood. The name sent a ripple through the room. Damien Blackwood wasn't just a player in the financial world. He was a legend. A self-made billionaire, he was the enigmatic founder of Blackwood Capital, a private equity firm known for its aggressive, almost prescient investments in distressed companies. "That was a bold take on Omnigen Miss Stone," he said, his voice a deep baritone. "Most analysts have already written them off. Most analysts are looking at the balance sheet, Mr. Blackwood." "I'm looking at the science," Eva replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the nervousness she felt. Damien was intrigued. He had built his empire on seeing value where others saw none. He saw that same instinct in this intense, unknown young woman. He invited her for coffee, which turned into a 3-hour conversation about market philosophy. He was struck by her raw intelligence and her hunger. There was a fire in her, a relentless drive that he recognized because he shared it. He didn't know her story, but he knew the look of someone who had fought their way back from an abyss. He offered her a job, a junior analyst position at Blackwood Capital. It was a foot in the door, but Eva knew it was the opportunity of a lifetime. She didn't just excel at Blackwood Capital. She thrived. She worked with a tireless, obsessive focus, often being the first one in the office and the last to leave. Her insights were sharp, her strategies innovative. The undervalued biotech firm she had championed. On her recommendation, Blackwood acquired a controlling stake. 6 months later, the patent she'd identified was licensed in a multi-billion-dollar deal, and the firm's stock skyrocketed. She had made Damien Blackwood a fortune, and in doing so had proven her worth tenfold. Damien became more than her boss. He became her mentor. He taught her how to navigate the treacherous currents of power, how to wield capital not just as money, but as a weapon. He was a demanding teacher, but he was fair. As their professional relationship deepened, so did their personal one. He was a private man, a widower whose wife had died from cancer years ago. He saw in Eva a kindred spirit, a survivor. He was drawn to the strength in her, the resilience that was evident in everything she did. One evening, working late in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, he finally asked the question that had been on his mind for months. "Eva, you work like you're being chased by demons," he said gently. Who are you running from? Looking into his steady, patient eyes. Ava made a decision. She couldn't build a future, even one of revenge, on a foundation of lies. She took a deep breath and told him everything. The perfect marriage, Julian Isabel, the life insurance policy, the hike on Raven's Peak, the fall, Silas, and the creation of Eva Stone. Damien listened in complete, unbroken silence, his expression hardening into one of cold fury. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. "The man is a monster," he said, his voice dangerously low. "And he's still out there, living on your money." He walked to the window, staring down at the city lights. "Revenge is a dish best served cold, Eva. But to serve it, you need more than a plate. You need an entire banquet hall. You need power so immense that he can't run, can't hide, and can't fight back." He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a protective fire. "I'm not just going to be your mentor anymore. I'm going to be your partner. Blackwood Capital's resources are now your resources. We are going to build you an empire, and from the heights of it you will reach down and deliver your own justice." That night marked a pivotal shift. Ava Stone was no longer just an analyst. She became Damien's protégé, his right hand, and eventually his partner in both business and life. He gave her control over a significant investment fund. She used it with surgical precision, her reputation growing in financial circles. The mysterious, brilliant Eva Stone became a name whispered with awe and a little bit of fear. 2 years after her arrival in New York, Eva stood beside Damien on the balcony of his penthouse. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a force. She had a fortune of her own, the backing of a billionaire, and a network of contacts that spanned the globe. In Boston, Julian Vance and Isabel Croft were living a life of luxury, believing their past was buried forever. They had no idea that a ghost was coming for them, not with chains and whispers, but with stock portfolios and acquisition papers. The hunt was about to begin. For Julian Vance, the 3 years following Alara's death had been a golden age. He and Isabel had moved into a magnificent colonial-style mansion in the wealthy suburb of Chestnut Hill. Isabel, no longer a mere lawyer, but a lady of leisure, spent her days shopping, lunching, and overseeing renovations. Julian had left Archer and Sterling using the insurance money to launch his own boutique investment firm, Vance Capital. He cultivated the image of a tragic visionary, a man who had turned personal loss into professional triumph. They were pillars of their new community, their names appearing on the donor lists of every major charity. The past was a sealed tomb. The first tremor was almost unnoticeable. A major deal Julian had been courting for months, a merger that would have doubled his firm's assets, inexplicably fell through at the last minute. The other party pulled out, citing a more attractive anonymous offer. Julian was furious, but wrote it off as bad luck. Then a month later, a block of shares in his firm's flagship fund was suddenly sold off by an institutional investor, causing a dip in its value and spooking his other clients. The sale was executed through a labyrinth of shell corporations, making the seller impossible to trace. Whispers began to circulate about the stability of Vance Capital. Eva, operating from her sleek office in Manhattan, watched the ripples with cold satisfaction. This was her opening salvo. She was the anonymous offer, the untraceable seller. Working with Damien's team of forensic accountants and legal sharks, she had mapped out every aspect of Julian's financial life. She knew his vulnerabilities, his over-leveraged positions, and the fragile ego that underpinned his entire operation. Her strategy was not a frontal assault, but a campaign of 1,000 cuts. She began by quietly buying up the debt of his key business partners. When their lines of credit were suddenly called in by their new unseen creditor, they were forced to pull their capital from Vance Capital, causing a slow but steady bleed. Julian grew increasingly paranoid. His world, once so secure, was being destabilized by an invisible hand. He lashed out at his staff, accusing them of incompetence. His relationship with Isabel, built on the thrill of conspiracy and shared wealth, began to fray under the pressure. "What is going on, Julian?" Isabel demanded one evening, her voice shrill. "The Hamiltons crossed the street to avoid me today. People are talking. They're saying your firm is a sinking ship. It's a market downturn." "It's temporary," Julian roared back, pouring himself a third glass of scotch. Everything is under control, but it wasn't. Ava's next move was more personal. She knew Julian and Isabel prided themselves on their social standing. Through a proxy, she purchased the property adjacent to their mansion and began a noisy, disruptive construction project that ran day and night. Then she discovered which exclusive country club they had fought so hard to join, and had an anonymous, meticulously researched dossier sent to the club's board detailing financial irregularities in Julian's past, that she had unearthed the very same off-the-books trading that had led him to his debt with Petrov. Their membership was quietly suspended, pending an internal review. The walls were closing in, and Julian couldn't see the architect of his ruin. He saw only shadows and bad luck, a world turning against him for no reason. Meanwhile, Ava made another crucial move. She sent an anonymous, untraceable email to a Detective Harding in the Boston Police Department. Harding was the detective who had originally handled Ilara's case. He had officially ruled it an accident, but a small, nagging doubt had always remained in the back of his mind. Julian's grief had seemed just a little too polished, his story a little too neat. The email contained a single sentence: Ilara Vance's fall was not an accident. Look into the life insurance policy taken out 48 hours before her death and follow the money. That was all Harding needed. He pulled the cold case file from the archives. The detail about the timing of the new policy had been noted, but dismissed at the time as a coincidence, a prudent husband ensuring his wife's future. Now seen through a new lens of suspicion, it looked sinister. Harding began to dig quietly and off the books, re-interviewing the insurance agent and looking into Julian Vance's financial history before and after his wife's death. The ghost in the machine was now working on two fronts, the financial and the legal. Eva's final financial strike was the masterpiece she and Damien had been planning for months. Julian, desperate to stop the bleeding at his firm, had consolidated his remaining personal and company assets to secure a massive loan to reinvest and show strength to the market. It was a risky all-or-nothing bet. The entity that provided the loan was, of course, a shell corporation owned by Blackwood Capital. The day the loan was finalized, Eva triggered the kill switch. She used her controlling interest in the debt of his other partners to initiate a cascade of defaults, which in turn triggered a covenant breach in Julian's new loan. The entire loan became due immediately and in full. He had 24 hours to produce a sum of money he simply did not have. Julian was ruined. Vance Capital, his mansion, their cars, their lavish lifestyle. It would all be seized by the creditor he had just indebted himself to. He sat in his opulent home office, the foreclosure notice in his trembling hand, a man completely and utterly defeated. He still had no idea who was behind it. He only knew that some unseen, malevolent force had systematically dismantled his entire world. That evening his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered it, expecting another angry client. "Hello, Julian," said a calm female voice. A voice that was hauntingly familiar, yet colder and harder than he remembered. A voice he thought he would never hear again. There was a pause, and then she spoke the words that made the blood freeze in his veins. "It's your wife. We need to talk." The single malt scotch, a 25-year-old vintage that cost more than most people's monthly rent, turned to acid in Julian Vance's mouth. The voice on the phone was a spectre, a sound he had meticulously buried under 3 years of lies and luxury. It was impossible, a trick of a mind, cracking under the immense, inexplicable pressure of the last few months. He gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, the wood cool and solid beneath his trembling fingers, a stark contrast to the dissolving reality around him. "Who is this?" He managed his voice, a dry, croaking thing. He tried to inject a note of authority, of anger, but it came out as a pathetic squeak. "This isn't funny." The laugh that came through the receiver was not the warm, gentle sound he remembered. It was something else entirely, cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of breaking glass. "Oh, but it is Julian," the voice said, each word a perfectly enunciated stiletto heel on marble. "The whole elaborate joke has been building to this punchline. You just didn't realize you were the punchline." "I'm hanging up," he blustered, but he made no move to do so. He was paralyzed. "No, you're not," she stated, not as a challenge, but as a simple fact. "Because you're going to listen. I know you just received a margin call from a creditor named Ethelred Holdings." Ethelred was an English king, known for being unprepared. You should have read more history. I own that holding company. I own your debt. By extension, I own your house, your firm, and the ridiculously overpriced watch on your wrist. I own your life, Julian. And now I'm coming to collect. The world tilted on its axis. An invisible enemy, a ghost in the machine that had been systematically dismantling his empire, was her. She gave him an address, the Regent Grand Hotel downtown, the presidential suite. "Be there in 1 hour. Come alone. If I see so much as a shadow of your legal team, or if you are 1 minute late, a comprehensive data package will be delivered to 3 recipients by morning. The first is the Securities and Exchange Commission, detailing every fraudulent trade you made to get your start. The second is the District Attorney's Office, outlining a very interesting insurance claim from 3 years ago. And the third," her voice dropped, becoming chillingly intimate, "is a little welcome home gift for your old friend, Mr. Petrov. I have his new address in Miami. I'm sure he'd love to know where to find the man who still owes him $3 million plus interest." The mention of Petrov's name was a physical blow. Julian gasped, the air sucked from his lungs. This wasn't a ghost. A ghost couldn't know all this. This was something far more terrifying. 1 hour, the voice repeated, and the line went dead. He stumbled out of his office, his face a mask of waxy, sweaty dread. Isabel was in the grand foyer shouting at a florist over the phone about the wilting hydrangeas. She saw his face, and her own expression soured. "Julian, what is it now? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have to go out," he said, his words slurring as he fumbled for his car keys on the hall table. "Don't ask questions. Don't ask questions," she shot back, her voice rising. "My life is falling apart. Our friends are avoiding us, and you're sneaking off into the night. Are you seeing someone else? Is that it?" He didn't answer, just slammed the heavy oak door behind him, the sound echoing his own internal collapse. The drive into Boston was a fever dream. Every pair of headlights in his rear-view mirror felt like an accusation. His mind, a frantic, cornered animal, raced back to that day on Raven's Peak. He remembered the feeling of the crisp mountain air, the look of perfect trust in Alara's eyes, the sickening momentary weightlessness as her body left the ledge. He had been so calm then, a master of his own destiny, executing a plan with cold precision. Now that same cold precision was being used against him, and the fear he felt was a primal, gut-wrenching terror he had never known. He parked in the hotel's private garage, his hands shaking so violently he could barely pull the ticket from the machine. He rode the silent wood-paneled elevator to the penthouse floor, each ascending number a tick on a doomsday clock. The door to the presidential suite was slightly ajar, an invitation into the abyss. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The suite was breathtaking, a cavern of glass and steel overlooking the entire Boston aft skyline. It was larger and more opulent than the home he had shared with Alara, a clear, deliberate statement of power. The art on the walls was magnificent, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there. A bitter irony given her passion. In the center of the vast living area, a woman stood, silhouetted against the glittering city lights, her back to him. Alara. He breathed the name a ghost on his lips. The figure didn't turn. You always did have a flair for the obvious, Julian. The voice was the same as on the phone, amplified by the room's acoustics, a sound that was both intimately familiar and terrifyingly alien. Beside her, a man stepped out of the shadows, tall, silver-haired, radiating an aura of absolute authority. Julian recognized him instantly from the financial news, Damian Blackwood, the billionaire titan, a man who could buy and sell entire countries before breakfast. The realization of who he was facing, of the power he had provoked, was a fresh wave of nausea. Finally she turned. Julian's heart seized. It was Alara's face, but the soul behind her eyes was a stranger. The softness was gone, replaced by a diamond-hard resolve. The warmth had been extinguished, leaving behind the cold, clear light of intelligence and contempt. She was dressed in a severe, exquisitely tailored black suit, a uniform of war. The art curator was dead. In her place stood a queen, and this was her throne room. You're alive." He stammered the words, absurdly inadequate. His mind, conditioned to deceive, fell back on its oldest trick, manufactured charm. He took a hesitant step forward, arranging his features into a mask of relieved shock. "Alara, my God, what happened to you? Where have you been? I thought you were gone. I mourned you, I searched for you." A single sharp laugh cut him off. "Stop. Just stop it, Julian. The performance is over. The audience has gone home. There's no one left to fool." She began to walk towards him, her steps measured and deliberate. "Let me save you the trouble of feigning confusion. You want to know where I've been? I've been busy. Remember that Omnicorp merger, the one that would have saved your firm? My bid was more attractive. Remember when Sterling Bank inexplicably froze your credit line 6 months ago? I own a controlling interest in their parent company. The construction next door, the suspension from the club, the slow, agonizing bleed of your clients. It was all me. I have spent every day for the last 3 years learning your world, not so I could join it, but so I could burn it to the ground." Every word was a perfectly placed nail in his coffin. The chaos of his life wasn't random. It was a symphony of destruction, and she had been the conductor. Just then the suite door burst open again. It was Isabel, her face flushed with rage. Julian! I knew it. I knew you were meeting someone. She stormed in, then stopped dead, her eyes landing on the impossible sight of Elara Vance alive and radiating power. Isabel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of another woman's grave, had just imploded. You, Isabel finally choked out, pointing a trembling, manicured finger. Elara's cold gaze shifted to her. Me, she confirmed, a flicker of disgust in her eyes. The inconvenient loose end. Did you really think this life was yours to keep, Isabel? It was rented on borrowed time, with my life as the collateral. I trust you'll have your things out of my house by Friday. My lawyers will be in touch about the art and furniture you'll be leaving behind. Julian finally shattered. All the lies, the arrogance, the self-delusion, it all fell away, leaving only a pathetic, terrified man. What do you want? He pleaded, his voice breaking. Is this about the money? You can have it. Take everything, just let us go. Elara stopped directly in front of him, so close he could see the faint, silvery scar near her hairline, a permanent reminder of his betrayal. You still think this was ever about money? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more menacing than any shout. Money is just a tool. It was the weapon you used against me, so I learned to wield it better than you ever could. You stole my life, my trust, my future. You tried to murder me for a financial payout. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. This is about justice. On that cue, a side door that Julian hadn't even noticed opened. Detective Harding stepped into the room, his face a grim mask of duty. He wasn't alone. Another uniformed officer stood behind him. Harding's eyes met Elara's with a brief, almost imperceptible nod of confirmation, before settling on Julian and Isabel. In his hand, he held a small, professional digital recorder. Julian Vance, Isabel Croft. Harding said, his voice the final booming gavel on their lives. I've heard and recorded enough. You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and the attempted murder of Elara Vance. Isabel let out a raw, hysterical shriek, collapsing into a heap of designer clothes and frantic denials. No, you can't. We'll get us lawyers. Julian simply stared at Elara, his face a canvas of utter devastation. The fight was gone. In her eyes, he saw no vengeful glee, no triumphant hatred. He saw something far worse, a calm, dispassionate finality. She hadn't just survived him, she had erased him. As Harding and the officer moved forward, the sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoed in the silent, cavernous room. They pulled a sobbing Isabel to her feet. Julian didn't resist. He was a hollowed-out shell. As they led him away, he turned his head, his eyes meeting Elara's one last time. A final desperate question escaped his lips. Why? He whispered. Why go to all this trouble? You could have just gone to the police. Elara watched him, her expression unchanging. Because you needed to see me, she said, her voice clear and steady, a final judgment. You needed to know that you failed. I didn't want you destroyed by a market crash or an anonymous lawsuit. I wanted you to stand in a room that I owned, surrounded by the power I built, and look me in the eye when your world turned to dust. I wanted you to know who beat you. She then turned her back on him, a definitive final gesture, and walked towards the vast window overlooking the city. She didn't watch as the disgraced couple was escorted out of the suite, their pathetic protests fading down the hall. Damien came to stand beside her, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. The chapter was finally truly closed. Eva Stone had served her purpose. Elara Vance was free. Elara Vance's story is a stark and powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we trust the most. But more than that, it's a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit. She was pushed into darkness, left for dead, and stripped of everything she knew. Yet from the ashes of her old life, she didn't just rise. She forged herself into something stronger, smarter and more powerful than the man who tried to destroy her. This story shows us that true justice isn't always about revenge. It's about reclaiming your power, rewriting your narrative, and proving that your survival is the ultimate victory. If Elara's incredible journey from victim to victor moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a story of resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories of survival justice and the unbreakable will to fight back. Thank you for listening. The gavel fell its sharp crack, lost in the cavernous silence of the ornate courtroom. All eyes were on Thomas Bradock, a man whose expensive suit couldn't conceal the ugliness twisting his handsome features. He pointed a trembling manicured finger not at the opposing counsel, but at his own pregnant wife, Felicia. She was a mistake. He spat the venomous words echoing off the polished marble. A disastrous, regrettable mistake. And that thing she's carrying is a mistake I refuse to pay for. A wave of gasps rippled through the gallery. But the real drama wasn't in his calculated cruelty. It was in the worn, leather-bound folder the judge had just placed on his bench. A folder containing the last will and testament of the one man Thomas could never bully his late father. The air in courtroom 4B of the San Mateo County Superior Court was thick with the perfume of old money and fresh animosity. It was a sterile, impersonal space, all mahogany panels and muted grey carpeting. Yet it had become the arena for the deeply personal evisceration of a marriage. Felicia Vale, soon to be she hoped, Felicia Vale once more sat ramrod straight in her cushioned chair. Her hands resting protectively over the pronounced swell of her stomach were the only part of her that betrayed the tremor running through her body. At 32, she still possessed the quiet, bookish beauty that had first caught Thomas Bradock's eye. Thoughtful grey eyes, a cascade of chestnut hair she'd simply pinned back, and a complexion that had never needed the heavy-handed ministrations of the Bradock family's preferred aestheticians. Today, however, that beauty was shadowed by a weariness that went bone deep. She felt less like a person and more like a legal exhibit, the pregnant wife. Across the aisle, Thomas Bradock sat flanked by his lawyer, a shark in a Savile Row suit named Sterling, and his mother, Isabella Bradock. Thomas was the picture of wounded pride, his jaw tight, his brow furrowed in a performance of aggrieved masculinity. He was, Felicia had once thought, devastatingly handsome. Now she saw the weakness in his chin, the petulance in the downturn of his lips. He was a boy playing at being a king, and his mother Isabella was the silent, unyielding power behind the throne. Isabella Bradock was a masterpiece of preserved aristocracy. Her silver hair was coiffed into a helmet of glacial perfection. Her pearls were real, her Chanel suit was vintage, and her disdain was palpable. She hadn't looked at Felicia once, preferring to stare at the judge as if he were a tardy waiter. From the moment Thomas had brought Felicia home to the sprawling Bradock estate in Atherton, Isabella had treated her not as a future daughter-in-law, but as a hostile takeover bid. Felicia wasn't old money. Her father was a history professor, her mother a librarian. To the Bradocks, whose wealth stretched back to the railroad barons, Felicia was a curious little commoner, a temporary amusement for their heir. Mr. Bradock, Judge Albright, said his voice a low gravel that commanded attention. He was a man in his 60s, with a weary face that had seen every flavor of human depravity. We are here to discuss the division of assets in your divorce proceedings. Let's try to maintain a certain level of decorum. Thomas's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client's emotional state is merely a reflection of the deep betrayal he has suffered. He entered into this marriage in good faith, only to find Felicia's lawyer, a kind but firm woman named Maria Davies, cut him off. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying. The betrayal Mr. Sterling refers to is my client's discovery that the prenuptial agreement Mr. Bradock forced upon her was not only unconscionable, but deliberately misleading. The prenup, the infamous document Isabella had presented to Felicia a week before the wedding. It had been an ambush styled as a casual chat over tea in the solarium. Just a formality, dear, Isabella had purred, sliding the thick document across the glass table. A way to keep things tidy. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings down the line. Thomas had backed his mother, of course. It's just how things are done, Ellie, he'd said, avoiding her eyes. It doesn't mean anything. It had meant everything. It had stipulated that in the event of a divorce, Felicia would walk away with nothing. Not a penny of the Bradock fortune, no claim to their properties, not even alimony. At the time, blinded by love and a naive belief in their future, she had signed it. Now, with a child on the way, a Bradock heir, the document was a cudgel they were using to beat her into submission. They offered her a one-time payout of $50,000 and a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive it would essentially erase her from their history. The validity of the prenuptial agreement is what we are here to debate. Judge Albright stated, his gaze fixed on Thomas. But your personal feelings about your wife are for the moment irrelevant. This seemed to be the wrong thing to say. Thomas, who had been simmering, suddenly boiled over. He stood up, knocking his chair back slightly. Irrelevant, he scoffed, his voice rising. She is the most relevant mistake I've ever made. I was trapped. My father was ill, he was fond of her for some reason, and I went along with it. He gestured wildly towards Felicia. She's a gold digger, Your Honor. A clever little parasite who saw a meal ticket and latched on. Maria Davies was on her feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. But the judge simply raised a hand, silencing her. He was watching Thomas, his expression unreadable. And Thomas, emboldened by the attention, took a step forward. He locked eyes with Felicia, and the mask of the charming, carefree man she had married fell away completely, revealing the snarling, entitled creature beneath. Do you know what she did? He addressed the judge, but his words were daggers aimed at her heart. She got pregnant on purpose. After I told her we should wait. After I told her things were not working out. She did it to trap me, to try and secure a piece of my family's legacy. Felicia felt the blood drain from her face. It was a lie. A vicious, calculated lie. They had been trying for a baby. It was Thomas who had been excited, who had talked about names, who had held her, and whispered dreams of their future family into her hair. That was before his father Arthur Bradock had passed away 2 months ago. Before Isabella had sunk her claws back into her son's soul. Then came the words that would be seared into her memory forever. Thomas's voice dropped, becoming low and guttural, dripping with a contempt so profound it physically hurt her. She was a mistake, he repeated, pointing at her belly. And that thing she's carrying is a mistake I refuse to pay for. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Felicia felt it like a physical blow. The baby inside her, their child, kicked as if in protest. Tears welled hot and fast, blurring the cruel face of the man she had loved. She saw Isabella smirk, a flicker of triumphant malice. This was what they wanted. To break her. To humiliate her so completely she would crawl away and accept their scraps. That is enough. Mr. Bradock. Judge Albright's voice was no longer weary. It was thunder. He slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing the shattering of Felicia's world. That is more than enough. You will sit down now. Thomas, looking slightly stunned by his own outburst, sank back into his chair, though his hateful glare remained fixed on Felicia. Judge Albright surveyed the scene, his eyes lingering on Felicia's tear-streaked face, then on Isabella's smug one. He took a deep, steadying breath and squared a stack of papers on his bench. This court is in recess for 15 minutes, he announced. However, before we break, a matter has been brought to my attention this morning by the executor of the late Arthur Bradock's estate. At the mention of his father, Thomas sat up straighter. A flicker of something confusion, perhaps apprehension, crossed his face. The judge picked up the worn, leather-bound folder. It appears that Mr. Arthur Bradock's final will and testament, executed 1 month prior to his death, contains certain stipulations that have a direct and material bearing on the assets currently under discussion in this divorce. With the executor's permission, and given its relevance, I am unsealing it now. He opened the folder. The silence in the courtroom returned, but this time it was different. It was thick with confusion and a dawning electric tension. A will, Arthur's will, had been read weeks ago. It was simple, leaving everything to his only son, Thomas, with a generous trust for Isabella. What was this? Felicia wiped her tears, her heart pounding a strange new rhythm. Arthur. Kind, gentle Arthur. He had been the only Bradock who had ever truly seen her, the only one who had ever been on her side. In his final months as his illness worsened, he would often ask her to sit with him in the garden, away from the oppressive gloom of the mansion and the even more oppressive presence of his wife. They would talk for hours about history, about books, about her dreams for the future. He seemed to understand her in a way Thomas never had. What is the meaning of this, Your Honor? Mr. Sterling asked, his composure ruffled for the first time. A new will. We were not informed, it would seem Mr. Sterling, the judge, said, peering over his spectacles at the document, that no one was. Arthur Bradock was a very thorough man. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room, and began to read. As Judge Albright's voice began to drone through the legalese of the will's preamble, Felicia's mind spun backwards, away from the sterile cruelty of the courtroom to the sun-dappled lawns of the Bradock estate. She remembered the first time she'd met Arthur Bradock. It was 1.5 years ago. Thomas had brought her to the family's annual summer gala, a lavish affair of champagne fountains and string quartets. She'd been terrified a simple librarian's daughter adrift in a sea of couture and condescension. Isabella had introduced her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her tone making Felicia Vale sound like a quaint, unlisted company. Felicia had escaped to the rose garden, overwhelmed when she found a man in a tweed jacket, his back to her, carefully pruning a climbing rose. He turned, and his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, held a warmth that was entirely absent from the main party. This was Arthur Bradock. "Ah, you've found my hiding spot," he'd said with a gentle smile. "Don't worry, I won't tell if you don't." They talked for nearly an hour. He didn't ask about her family's money or connections. He asked what she was reading. He asked about her work at the San Francisco Public Library, his face lighting up when she described her passion for historical archives. He spoke of his own love for history, a passion he lamented his son did not share. "Thomas sees history as a list of assets acquired," Arthur had said, with a sad, knowing sigh. "He sees the names Rockefeller, Carnegie, Bradock. But he doesn't understand the stories, the humanity." In that single conversation, Arthur had shown her more genuine interest and kindness than Isabella had in 6 months of strained dinners. He saw her not as an attachment to his son, but as a person. Over the next year, he became her quiet ally in the gilded cage of the Bradock family. While Isabella laid subtle traps and Thomas grew more distant under his mother's influence, Arthur would seek Felicia out. He'd leave a rare first-edition book on her bedside table or invite her to walk the grounds, sharing stories of the family that were not about wealth, but about love, loss, and folly. He was already ill then, a creeping lung disease that stole his breath but never his sharp intellect. As his condition worsened, the dynamic in the house shifted. Isabella became more controlling, treating her husband's illness as an inconvenience and tightening her grip on Thomas. The pregnancy had been a brief, shining moment of hope. Thomas had been ecstatic at first. It was his idea, a way to, as he'd put it, finally start our own family away from all the pressure. They'd celebrated with a trip to Big Sur, away from the oppressive atmosphere of the estate. He had put his hands on her still flat stomach and spoken of a future that felt real and full of love. The moment they returned, Isabella shattered it. Felicia overheard the argument from the top of the grand staircase. A baby. Isabella's voice was like ice. "Now, Thomas, you are an imbecile. You have no idea what you've done." "Mother, it's my child. Our child. I love Ellie." "Love," she'd scoffed. "You are infatuated with a librarian, Thomas, a nobody. And now she has tethered herself to our legacy with the oldest trick in the book. Do you think for 1 second she wasn't planning this? To tie you down, to make herself indispensable." The poison took root quickly. Thomas began to pull away. He started spending more time at the office, coming home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and another woman's perfume. The excuses were flimsy, the apologies hollow. He grew short-tempered, echoing his mother's criticisms. He'd comment on Felicia's clothes, her friends, her lack of ambition. Then Arthur's health took a steep decline. In his last weeks, he was confined to his bed. The house was somber and quiet. Isabella managed his care with ruthless efficiency, keeping visitors to a minimum. But Arthur would still ask for Felicia. One afternoon, just a month before he died, he beckoned her close. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were lucid. "Felicia," he rasped, taking her hand. His own was frail, all paper-thin skin and bone. "Don't let them break you. You have more strength than any of them." He'd looked pointedly at her stomach. "And you have a responsibility to that child, a responsibility to be strong." He'd made her promise. She hadn't understood the full weight of his words then. 2 weeks later, he summoned his personal attorney, a man Felicia had never met, to the house. Isabella had been furious, trying to insist that the family lawyer, Mr. Sterling, be present. Arthur, with a surprising burst of strength, had refused. "This is a private matter, Isabella," he'd said. The meeting had lasted for 3 hours. The next day Arthur seemed more at peace. He passed away in his sleep a month later. The first reading of the will had been exactly what everyone expected. A simple document leaving Bradock Enterprises and the bulk of the estate to Thomas. Isabella was granted a lifelong right to live in the family mansion and a generous stipend from a separate trust. It was so straightforward that Thomas had smirked a look of vindicated relief on his face. With his father gone, the final obstacle to his absolute inheritance and Isabella's absolute influence was removed. 2 days after that, Thomas had asked for a divorce. The words were cold, rehearsed. He'd said the marriage was a mistake, that he'd been pressured by his father's failing health. He presented it as a clean break, a return to the natural order of things. When Felicia, heartbroken and 7 months pregnant, had refused to be discarded so easily, he had turned vicious. The battle over the prenup began, and now here they were. A sharp intake of breath from Mr. Sterling snapped Felicia back to the present. Judge Albright had finished with the preliminary sections of the will. His eyes scanned the room before continuing. "We now come to Article 4. The judge said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing every ounce of attention in the room. "Regarding the disposition of my primary asset, my controlling interest in Bradock Enterprises Incorporated." Thomas leaned forward, a smug look returning to his face. This was it, the confirmation of his kingdom. "I, Arthur Bradock," the judge read his voice, clear and deliberate, "being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare the following. My son Thomas Bradock has in recent months shown a lamentable lack of judgment and a character ill-suited to the stewardship of the company my grandfather built." A jolt went through the room. Thomas's face went from smug to slack-jawed shock. Isabella's carefully constructed composure cracked her mouth, falling open slightly. What Thomas whispered the word stolen by the cavernous room. The judge continued, his voice unwavering. "He has proven himself to be easily manipulated and has forgotten the most fundamental principle of our family's success, that our name is built on integrity, not just on assets. Therefore, I cannot in good conscience deliver the future of Bradock Enterprises into his hands." "This is insane," Sterling blurted out, rising to his feet. "Your Honor, my client's father was clearly not of sound mind. He was heavily medicated. He was certified of sound mind by 2 independent physicians the day this will was signed, Mr. Sterling. Their affidavits are attached," Judge Albright said coolly, not even looking up. "Now sit down." Sterling sank back into his chair, his face pale. The judge's eyes found Felicia's across the room. She held his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. He went on. "Therefore, I hereby bequeath my entire controlling share of Bradock Enterprises, representing 51% of the voting stock, not to my son, but to a trust. This trust shall be known as the Arthur Vale Bradock Legacy Trust." Vale. He had used her maiden name. A low, guttural sound escaped Isabella's throat. The judge continued reading the clause that would change everything. "The sole beneficiary of this trust is to be my first-born grandchild, the child currently carried by my daughter-in-law, Felicia Vale Bradock." The courtroom devolved into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Thomas looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He stared at Felicia's belly, not with contempt, but with a dawning, horrified awe. That thing, that mistake, was now the majority shareholder of his entire inheritance. But Arthur Bradock wasn't finished. The final killing blow was yet to come. Judge Albright looked up from the document, his gaze passing over Thomas and Isabella, before settling once more on Felicia. He read the last sentence of the article, his voice ringing with a profound posthumous finality. The sole executor and trustee of this trust, vested with absolute and unconditional authority over all voting rights, board appointments, and financial decisions of Bradock Enterprises, until the beneficiary reaches the age of 25, shall be the child's mother, and my trusted daughter-in-law, Felicia Vale Bradock. For a long moment, the world stopped. The frantic whispers died. The rustling of papers ceased. The only sound in courtroom 4B was the frantic, trapped beat of Felicia's own heart. She stared at Judge Albright, certain she had misheard, that the grief and stress had finally caused her to hallucinate. Sole executor and trustee, absolute and unconditional authority. The words didn't compute. They were abstract alien concepts that didn't belong to her. Felicia Vale, the librarian, the spurned wife, the humiliated mother-to-be. Then the spell broke. A strangled cry tore from Isabella Bradock's throat. It was a sound of pure, undiluted fury, the cry of a queen who has just watched her castle crumble into dust. "No, it's a lie, a forgery!" she shrieked, lurching to her feet. Her mask of aristocratic control was gone, replaced by a visage of raw, twitching rage. That woman, that scheming little harlot, she manipulated him. She poisoned my husband against his own family. Mr. Sterling, his face the color of ash, tried to restrain her, whispering urgently. "Isabella, not here. Control yourself." But she was beyond control. She pointed a trembling, diamond-clad finger at Felicia. This was your plan all along. You seduced a dying old man, twisted his mind." "Mrs. Bradock." Judge Albright's voice cracked like a whip. "You are on the verge of being held in contempt. Another outburst like that, and you will be removed by the bailiff." Isabella snapped her mouth shut, but her chest heaved, and her eyes fixed on Felicia promised retribution. Thomas was eerily silent. He sat frozen, his body rigid, his eyes wide and vacant. He was staring at the polished table in front of him, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing his entire world, the one he had been promised from birth, vanish before his eyes. The kingdom he was meant to inherit, the power he was meant to wield, had just been handed lock, stock, and barrel to the woman he had publicly disavowed, and the unborn child he had branded a mistake. Felicia's lawyer, Maria Davies, leaned over her, voice a low, steady murmur in Felicia's ear. "Felicia, did you hear that? Do you understand what this means?" Felicia could only shake her head slowly, her mind a whirlwind of shock. She looked from Thomas's shattered expression to Isabella's murderous glare. She felt a kick, a strong, solid thump from within, a reminder of the tiny, unknowing beneficiary at the center of this cataclysm. Judge Albright, seemingly unfazed by the eruption, continued as if reading a grocery list. "The will goes on to state," he said, his voice cutting through the residual tension, "that Thomas Bradock is to be granted a salaried position as President of Operations, reporting directly to the Board of Directors. A board that the new trustee," he paused, looking directly at Felicia, "has the sole authority to appoint or dismiss." The implication was brutally clear. Thomas was no longer the heir apparent. He was an employee who could be fired. By her. Furthermore, The judge added, "The will stipulates that Thomas Bradock and Isabella Bradock are permitted to maintain residence in the Atherton family home, but only with the express ongoing permission of the trustee. The deed and title of the property are to be transferred to the Arthur Vale Bradock Legacy Trust." They were tenants in their own home. Their right to live there was now entirely at Felicia's discretion. The finality of it was absolute. Arthur hadn't just disinherited his son. He had orchestrated a complete coup d'etat from beyond the grave. He had seen the cruelty, the weakness, the greed, and he had built a fortress to protect his grandchild and the woman he believed could safeguard his legacy. He hadn't just given Felicia a shield, he had given her a sword, an arsenal, an entire kingdom. The will Judge Albright concluded, closing the leather folder with a soft thud. Is accompanied by a signed and notarized letter from Arthur Bradock detailing his reasons. It explains his concerns over his son's profligate spending his susceptibility to his mother's corrosive influence and his cruel and dishonorable treatment of his pregnant wife. The letter states, and I quote, "I have observed Felicia for 2 years. She possesses an integrity my son sorely lacks. She is intelligent, compassionate, and her loyalty is not to money but to family. I do not give her this power to punish my son, but to protect my grandchild. I trust her to do what is right." The judge looked at Thomas. The letter also expresses hope, Mr. Bradock, that this drastic but necessary action will provide you with an opportunity to rediscover the man you were meant to be, not the man your mother wants you to be. That last line was a dagger meant for Isabella, and it hit its mark. She flinched as if struck. Judge Albright removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Given these revelations," he stated, his voice returning to its official, dispassionate tone, "the financial landscape of this divorce has been fundamentally altered. The prenuptial agreement is now entirely moot, as the primary assets Mr. Bradock believed were his to protect are in fact not his. The $50,000 settlement offered to Mrs. Bradock is, to put it mildly, insufficient." He looked at Felicia, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something almost like a smile in his tired eyes. "In fact, Mrs. Bradock is now, for all intents and purposes, the single most powerful financial entity in this room. The assets belong to the trust she controls." He turned to the stunned lawyers. "I am dissolving these proceedings for today. I suggest you all go home, absorb the contents of this will, and reschedule when you have a more realistic grasp of your clients' respective situations. Mr. Sterling," he added pointedly, "you may want to advise your client that his wife's mistake now controls his salary, his home, and his future. A bit of humility might be in order." With a final sharp rap of the gavel, he declared, "Court is adjourned." The judge rose and swept out of the room, leaving a vortex of stunned silence in his wake. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, chaos erupted. Reporters who had been lurking in the gallery rushed towards the doors. Sterling was frantically trying to speak to Thomas, who was still catatonic. Maria Davies was patting Felicia's shoulder, her face a mixture of shock and elation. Felicia slowly got to her feet, her legs unsteady. She felt dizzy, disconnected from her own body. Isabella was the first to move towards her, her face a terrifying mask of fury. She stalked across the aisle, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. "You will not get away with this," Isabella hissed, her voice low and venomous, close enough for Felicia to smell her cloyingly expensive perfume. "I will fight this. I will prove you are an unfit mother. I will drag your name through so much mud you'll drown in it. That baby will never see a penny." Before Felicia could react, a figure stepped between them. It was Thomas. His face was ashen, his eyes wild with a desperate, frantic energy. He looked from his mother to Felicia, then back again. "Mother, stop," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just stop." He then turned to Felicia. The contempt was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading panic. The man who not 20 minutes ago had called her and their child a mistake now looked at her as if she were a lifeline. "Ellie," he began, his voice cracking. He even reached a hand out as if to touch her arm before letting it fall. "Ellie, I didn't mean it. You have to believe me. I was angry. I was pressured." His eyes flickered towards his mother. "We can fix this, you and me. We can stop the divorce. We can raise the baby together, in our house." The audacity of it was breathtaking. The whiplash of his transformation from tyrant to supplicant was so sudden it was nauseating. He wasn't apologizing for the cruelty. He was trying to reverse a transaction that had gone horribly wrong for him. He didn't see a wife he had wounded. He saw the new CEO of his life. Felicia looked at his desperate, pleading face. She looked at Isabella, who was watching them with narrowed, calculating eyes, her mind already plotting new strategies. And she felt nothing. Not love, not hate, not even anger anymore. Just a profound, chilling emptiness where her love for him used to be. She looked at his outstretched, trembling hand. Then she looked him directly in the eye, her own gaze clear and steady for the first time that day. Without a word, she turned and walked away, leaving her husband and his mother standing in the ruins of their fallen kingdom. Her lawyer Maria rushed to her side, and together they walked out of the courtroom. Not towards a miserable, uncertain future, but towards an empire Felicia had never asked for, but now, by the grace of a good man's final act, commanded. The days that followed the courtroom bombshell were a blur of surreal adjustments. Felicia didn't return to the small rented apartment she had secured as a refuge from her marriage. Maria Davies had insisted it wasn't secure enough. "You're not just a private citizen anymore, Felicia," she'd said, her tone urgent. "You are the head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. There are protocols now." And so Felicia found herself in a gilded prison of a different sort, a penthouse suite at the Four Seasons paid for by the Arthur Vale Bradock Legacy Trust, with a round-the-clock security detail stationed in the hallway, lawyers, trust officers, and financial advisors. Men and women with sharp suits and even sharper minds. All remnants of Arthur's loyal inner circle paraded through her living room. They presented her with binders thick with financial reports, organizational charts, and legal obligations. They used terms like fiduciary duty, hostile takeover defenses, and quarterly earnings projections. At first, it was overwhelmingly intimidating. She was Felicia Vale, who found comfort in the Dewey Decimal System, not the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But as they spoke, she listened. She asked questions, simple ones at first, then more complex ones. And she discovered something surprising. The logic of it, the intricate web of cause and effect, wasn't so different from tracing historical events or archival records. It was a story just told in the language of numbers. More importantly, she was fueled by a powerful clarifying force, the memory of Arthur's words, "I trust her to do what is right," and the visceral, soul-crushing memory of Thomas's "that thing she's carrying is a mistake." One was a sacred trust, the other a declaration of war. She would honor the former by prevailing in the latter. Her phone rang incessantly. The calls were from Thomas. He left dozens of voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. They were a pathetic symphony of panicked apologies and self-serving promises. "Ellie, baby, please pick up. I'm so sorry. I've been such a fool. My mother, she gets in my head. But that's over now, I swear. I was just looking at the crib we ordered. Remember the one from that little shop in Carmel? It's all about us, Ellie. You, me, and our little boy. Or girl. It's all that matters. I told Sterling to fire his legal team. We don't need lawyers. We're a family. Just come home. Please, just come home, and we can figure this all out." She never answered. She never listened to a single message, twice. It was the desperate pleading of a man who had lost his wallet, not a husband who had broken his wife's heart. Isabella, for her part, had gone to ground, but it was a tactical silence, not a surrender. Maria's legal team reported that Isabella had hired a new, notoriously aggressive law firm, specializing in contesting wills. They were digging, searching for any doctor who would testify to Arthur's incompetence, any nurse who would claim Felicia had restricted access to him, any scrap of dirt they could find, to paint her as a manipulative usurper. A week after the hearing, Felicia knew she couldn't stay in the hotel forever. She had to make a move. The trust owned the Bradock mansion. It was her house now. More importantly, it was her child's house. Arthur had not intended for his grandchild to be raised in exile. So she made a decision. She called Maria. "I'm going home," she said, her voice firm. "Felicia is that wise. It's not about wisdom, Maria. It's about a clear message. The Queen is not in hiding." The return was as dramatic as she had intended. She didn't sneak in the back door. She arrived in a black town car, arranged by the trust, which swept up the long gravel driveway to the imposing facade of the Atherton mansion. As she stepped out of the car, the heavy front doors opened. Thomas stood there, his face a mixture of hope and terror. He had clearly been watching for her. He was dressed down in a cashmere sweater, an attempt to look soft, approachable. "Ellie." He breathed a relieved smile, touching his lips. "You're home." "I am," Felicia said, her tone cool and level. She walked past him into the cavernous marble-floored foyer. The air was still and smelled of lemon polish and lilies, just as it always had. "I've asked a moving company to clear out my old things from the guest wing. They will be delivering my new furniture for the nursery this afternoon." Thomas's smile faltered. "Of course, anything you want. I had Mrs. Albright air out the master suite for you. For us." Felicia stopped and turned to him. "Let's be very clear, Thomas. I am not here to reconcile. I am here because this is my home now. It belongs to the trust that I command. You and your mother are living here at my discretion." The words hung in the air, cold and hard. The color drained from Thomas's face. "My legal team," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, "will be drawing up a tenancy at will agreement for you and Isabella. It will stipulate the terms of your continued residence. Furthermore, I am calling a board meeting for Bradock Enterprises for Monday morning. As president of operations, your attendance will be required. You'll be expected to present a full report on the company's current standing." She was no longer his wife. She was his landlord and his boss. The reality of it slammed into him, and his composure finally shattered. "Felicia, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. Don't be like this. This isn't you. You're not this cold." "You're right," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "The woman I was would have forgiven you. She would have believed your lies and let you hurt her again. But you and your mother killed that woman. You stood in a court of law, and you killed her. So you'll have to get used to the woman who is left." Just then a sharp, imperious voice echoed from the top of the grand staircase. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Isabella stood there, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, her face a thunderous mask. Felicia didn't even grant her a full glance. "Hello, Isabella," she said, her voice carrying easily in the grand space. "I'm home. I trust your new lawyers have explained the situation to you. You're a guest here. Try not to forget it." She turned and began to walk towards the east wing, where Arthur's private study was located. It had been her sanctuary with him, and it would now be her command center. "You will regret this," Isabella shrieked from the landing. "I will see you on the street." Felicia paused, her back still to them. "No, you won't," she said without turning around. "You will see me in the boardroom, Monday at 9 a.m. Don't be late." And with that, she walked away, leaving mother and son standing in the opulent foyer of a house that was no longer theirs, silenced by the quiet, unshakable authority of the woman they had tried and failed to destroy. The following months were a masterclass in trench warfare, fought not with bullets, but with board appointments and legal briefs. Felicia, now 8 and then 9 months pregnant, moved not with the timid uncertainty of a librarian, but with the deliberate, focused strategy of a general. Arthur's study became her war room. Its rich, leather-bound books on military history and corporate biography now seemed less like a collection and more like a curated library of tactics left for her by a brilliant mentor. Her first move was the board meeting. She walked into the Bradock Enterprises boardroom, a long, intimidating chamber dominated by a colossal mahogany table and portraits of stern-faced Bradock men, and every head turned. The existing board members, all cronies of Thomas and Isabella, looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and thinly veiled contempt. Thomas sat at the head of the table, a place he had occupied for less than 3 months. Felicia, guided by Maria, and the Trust's chief counsel, took the seat directly opposite him. She didn't claim his chair. She created a new center of power. She let Thomas run through his report, a rambling, jargon-filled presentation clearly designed to intimidate and confuse her. When he finished, he looked at her, a challenge in his eyes. Felicia didn't respond directly to his report. Instead, she introduced the Trust's counsel, who then calmly and methodically laid out the legal reality of the new ownership structure. Then Felicia spoke. "Thank you, Thomas, for that overview," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "In my capacity as trustee, my primary duty is to ensure the long-term health and integrity of this company for the sole beneficiary. To that end, I have spent the last week reviewing the company's performance, its leadership and its vision, and I have found it lacking." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Effective immediately, I am exercising my authority as trustee to reconstitute the board of directors. Mr. Henderson, Ms. Albright, Mr. Chen," she said, naming 3 of Isabella's oldest and most loyal allies. "Your positions on this board are terminated. Thank you for your service." The 3 of them stared aghast. "You can't do that," one of them sputtered. "She can, and she has," the Trust's lawyer interjected smoothly. Felicia continued, her gaze sweeping the table. "In their place, I am appointing 3 new members. First, Ms. Maria Davies, whose legal expertise will be invaluable. Second, Mr. Alistair Finch." She named Arthur's longtime, fiercely loyal financial advisor, a man Isabella had forced into retirement. And third, Dr. Lena Petrova, a leading expert in sustainable business ethics from Stanford University. Arthur Bradock often spoke of creating a legacy, not just a profit margin. We will honor that vision. It was a coup. Clean, swift, and utterly devastating. She had decapitated Isabella's power base within the company in less than 5 minutes. Thomas sat impotent, watching his allies pack their briefcases in stunned silence. He was still president, but he was now a president who answered to a board that was loyal to her. Life in the mansion was a silent, cold war. Felicia took over the master wing, while Thomas and Isabella were confined to the guest suites. They shared the same roof, passed each other in the long hallways like ghosts, and ate meals at different times to avoid contact. Isabella's attempts at psychological warfare, leaving old happy photos of her and Thomas out making loud, pitying phone calls about poor, confused Felicia, were met with a wall of serene, impenetrable silence. Thomas, meanwhile, swung wildly between pathetic attempts at reconciliation and sullen resentment. He'd leave a single rose on her desk one day, and the next he'd make a sarcastic comment about her playing CEO at the dinner table. Felicia ignored it all. Her focus was singular, the baby and the business. She found an unexpected strength in the routine. She'd wake early, walk the gardens as she had with Arthur, and then spend hours with Alistair Finch, the reappointed advisor. He would patiently walk her through balance sheets and investment portfolios, marveling at her quick grasp of complex ideas. "Your father-in-law was right about you," he said one afternoon. "You have a formidable mind, Mrs. Bradock. You see the whole chessboard." The one front where Isabella believed she could still win was the legal challenge to the will. Her lawyers filed motion after motion, claiming undue influence and testamentary incapacity. They deposed nurses, gardeners, and cooks, searching for any hint that Felicia had manipulated a dying man. The case was set to be heard by Judge Albright once again. Isabella was confident. She believed, found a star witness, a disgruntled former nurse, whom Isabella had paid handsomely to testify that Felicia had constantly bad-mouthed Thomas and Isabella to Arthur, poisoning his mind in his final days. The day before the hearing, Felicia was in the nursery putting the finishing touches on the room. It was painted a soft, gentle yellow, with a mural of a forest scene on one wall. As she stood there, her hands on her huge belly, feeling the strong, steady kicks of her child, she felt a profound sense of peace. She was ready for whatever came next. That evening, a courier delivered a small sealed package to her. It was from Arthur's personal attorney, the executor of the estate. The accompanying note was brief. "Arthur asked me to give this to you if Isabella ever formally contested the will. He called it insurance." Felicia's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was not a document, but a small, solid-state audio recorder and a single key. Confused, she pressed play. The voice that filled the silent room was Arthur's. It was weak, raspy, clearly recorded in his last weeks, but it was unmistakably him. "If you are hearing this, Felicia," the recording began, "it means Isabella is trying to undo my final wishes. I am not surprised. Her greed has always been her most defining trait. I want you in the court to know the truth." Arthur's recorded voice then detailed with painful clarity Isabella's emotional cruelty throughout their marriage, her constant manipulation of their son, and her open contempt for Felicia. He spoke of how Isabella had tried to bar Felicia from his room, how she had dismissed his doctors and tried to bring in her own specialists who would declare him incompetent. "But the most important evidence," Arthur's voice continued, "is not my words, but hers. Last week, she did not know I had my lawyer install a small recording device in this room activated by voice. She came in, believing me to be asleep to speak with Thomas. They thought they were alone. The recording is on this device. The key is to my old safe in the study. The evidence inside will corroborate everything. Felicia's blood ran cold. She stopped the recording, her heart pounding. She took the small antique key, went to the study, and opened the safe she never knew existed, hidden behind a false panel of books. Inside was a folder. It contained copies of emails between Isabella and a private investigator she had hired to dig up dirt on Felicia a year ago. It contained financial records showing large payments to the disgruntled nurse. And it contained a second audio recorder. With a deep breath, she pressed play. This time the voices were clearer. It was Isabella and Thomas in Arthur's room, thinking he was sedated and unconscious. Isabella's voice was sharp, cutting. "You have to divorce her the moment he's gone, Thomas. Not a day later. Offer her a pittance. Humiliate her. Make her crawl back to whatever hovel she came from. We cannot have that common bloodline infecting this family." Then Thomas's voice, weak and compliant. "And the baby? What do I do about the baby?" "The baby is a non-issue," Isabella had replied coldly. "We'll claim she trapped you. We'll claim it might not even be yours. We will drag her through a custody battle that will break her. In the end, she'll give it all up just to have peace. The Bradock legacy will remain pure. Your father in his senile state may be fond of her, but we will protect our family from his sentimentality." Felicia sank into a chair, the audio recorder slipping from her fingers. It wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a confession. They had laid out their entire vicious plan in the presence of the very man whose legacy they sought to protect. She now held more than just a defense. She held a weapon of annihilation. The hearing was tomorrow, and she knew exactly what she was going to do. The morning of the hearing was grey and overcast. Isabella Bradock arrived looking imperious and confident, her paid star witness, Nurse Brenda, trailing in her wake. Thomas followed, looking haggard, a man caught in an inescapable vice. Felicia entered last, calm and composed, carrying a simple leather briefcase. Isabella's lawyer, Fletcher, called his witness. Nurse Brenda took the stand and delivered a tearful, practiced performance, painting Felicia as a cunning manipulator who had poisoned a dying, vulnerable Arthur against his loving family. She would whisper insults about Mrs. Bradock and Thomas for hours, the nurse claimed, dabbing a fake tear. She twisted his every thought. It was heartbreaking. When it was Maria Davies's turn, she approached the stand with lethal calm. "Nurse Brenda," she began, "aside from your salary, were you paid any other amounts by Isabella Bradock? Specifically, a sum of $250,000 transferred to an offshore account 2 days after Arthur Bradock's death." The nurse's face went white. Fletcher shot to his feet, shouting objections, but Judge Albright overruled him instantly. "Answer the question, Nurse Brenda." The witness stammered, her lies collapsing under the weight of a single damning question. But this was only the opening salvo. At a nod from Maria, Felicia stood the proud swell of her pregnancy, a silent testament to everything at stake. "Your Honor," Felicia said, her voice ringing with newfound strength, "I would like to present new evidence that will clarify the true nature of the influence surrounding Arthur Bradock in his final days." She opened her briefcase and removed a small audio recorder. "This is a recording made by my father-in-law himself. He left it for me in the event of this exact scenario." She pressed play. Arthur's weak, rasping voice filled the stunned courtroom. He spoke of his faith in Felicia's character and his deep disappointment in his son and wife. A visible shockwave went through the room when he mentioned a second recording one he had secretly made of Isabella and Thomas. Isabella's face contorted a mask of dawning horror. And now, Felicia said, her voice cold as steel, as she held up the second device, the conversation Arthur spoke of, recorded in his room when they believed he was unconscious. She pressed play again. The courtroom was plunged into a chilling silence, broken only by the recorded voices of mother and son plotting Felicia's destruction. Isabella's voice, crisp and cruel. "You have to divorce her the moment he's gone. Humiliate her. Make her crawl. We cannot have that common bloodline infecting this family." Then Thomas, weak and complicit. "And the baby? What do I do about the baby?" And the final monstrous words from Isabella. "The baby is a non-issue. We'll claim it might not even be yours. We will drag her through a custody battle that will break her." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute and condemning. Isabella was frozen in her chair, her face a grotesque tableau of public exposure and private ruin. Thomas had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. His lawyer sat down, utterly defeated. Judge Albright stared at Isabella, his face a mask of cold fury. "Mrs. Bradock," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "what you have just heard in your own words is a monstrous conspiracy to commit perjury and destroy an innocent woman. And you," he said, turning his glare on Thomas, "your cowardice is contemptible." He slammed his gavel, the sound like a gunshot. "The challenge to this will is dismissed with extreme prejudice. I am fining Mrs. Isabella Bradock $500,000 for malicious prosecution. And I am forwarding this audio evidence to the district attorney's office for investigation into potential criminal charges." His expression softened only when he looked at Felicia. "Mrs. Bradock, you have endured a trial by fire and proven your father-in-law's faith in you was not misplaced. You are free." It was over. Complete victory. As the court adjourned, Thomas finally lifted his head, his face ravaged by tears. He looked at Felicia, his eyes a bottomless well of self-loathing, knowing no words could ever bridge the chasm he had created. Felicia met his gaze not with triumph, but with a quiet, somber finality. She gave a single nod, an acknowledgement of the tragedy he had authored, then turned and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. 2 weeks later, Felicia gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him Arthur. The day she brought him home, the mansion felt different. Isabella was gone, having retreated to await the results of the DA's investigation. Thomas remained a ghost in the guest wing. Felicia stood in the grand foyer, holding her tiny son. She looked up at the portrait of the first Arthur Bradock, then at the empty, faded space on the wall where Isabella's portrait used to hang. The house was no longer a cage or a battlefield. It was a sanctuary. It was home. Her son Arthur Vale Bradock cooed in his sleep, his tiny hand wrapped securely around her finger. He was not a mistake. He was a legacy. And she was his guardian. The past was a story of pain, but the future was hers to write. From courtroom humiliation to the head of an empire, Felicia Bradock's journey is a breathtaking saga of karmic justice. A husband's cruelty sparked his own downfall, but a father's final act of love provided the ultimate checkmate. She didn't just win her freedom, she inherited a fortune and proved that true power comes from character, not just a name. If you were moved by Felicia's incredible triumph, hit that like button to show your support. Share this story of empowerment with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another video where justice is finally served.